average, a PCO2 of 50, and a PO2 of 50. That's sort of the nicknames that I'm seeing the patients.
Don't say we never gave it. That will be on the test.
Hang on there, Mr. Zach. I'm sorry. What are you eating?
I know.
Oh, okay. All I see is green. What the hell is he eating with green? All right. So we now need to talk about your ability to make urine. So the kidneys are going to be the structure that provides your ability to make urine. I want to think about 3 different functions of your kidneys. Function number 1, in my opinion, is to maintain blood volume. Function number 2, to maintain ion balance, proper ion levels. And number 3, regulate pH. Blood volumes, ion levels, and pH. Let's see how long she'll keep her arm up. Yes.
Why do you say, in your opinion, blood volume?
Because there's a lot of books, well, it's sort of not necessarily a debate, but they sort of list different things. I don't really think about, well, who should put as number 1? I mean, what's the big thing about your kidney? Sometimes they talk about ions as being number 1. Some books talk about pH. It's sort of like what came to their head as they went through it. But in terms of thinking about the actual order of what they really do a lot of, is maintaining blood volume. If you guys become dehydrated, right, you have a drop of blood volume, kidneys kick in. Ion imbalance, like calcium levels, kidneys kick in, right? Maintaining pH to respiration problems, kidneys kick in. So it's just more of, but most books don't, I think, put in the proper order of what they do primarily. All right, so how do they do this? Well, those of you that have already had lab might recognize the structure. Those of you that yet to have lab, you will recognize the structure. But for not knowing what the heck it is, this is what's known as your afferent arteriole. And this is a little capillary inside of your kidneys. You have about 1.5 million of them on average in each kidney. But here's what I want to focus on in this picture. The black arrow is the flow of blood coming into this big structure called the glomerulus. That means ball. And it's a continuous capillary. So the blood would come in, and it would actually leave through the efferent arteriole. So blood comes in, it's going to get filtered. The same way you guys think about filtering on the arterial side of a capillary bed. Remember the CHP and VTOP idea? We're going to have that same principle happen here. This is a filtration process where we're filtering blood through that capillary, and that filtered plasma with all of its ions and organic substances are these turquoise arrows. So that blood's going to come in, it's going to get filtered and fill up this space around the capillary bed, and then exit through this little tube over here. Whatever didn't get filtered, right, ends up coming out through the other end. Well, how many liters of blood do you guys have? 5. 5. You have 1,000 liters of blood coming in 24 hours. That's a lot of recirculation, right? 1,000 liters come in. In terms of how much of that 1,000 liters is filtered, that turquoise arrow represents 180 liters. So 1,000 minus 180 would be 820 liters come out the other end. So we're getting 180 liters leaving this capillary ball and entering this structure here. That's going to become urine. Does anybody know on average how much urine you produce in a day? Between 1 to 1.5 liters. That's about how much urine you actually create. So if we are letting 180 liters of fluid enter this little tube, we're going to have to recycle all but 1.5 liters of it. And that's the whole purpose of tonight and Wednesday's lecture. talk about how we would be able to alter that absorption rate. All right, so you get 1,000 liters coming in. We filter, of that 1,000, we filter 180 liters of it out, which means you have roughly 820 liters coming out through the efferent arteriole.
And that 1,000 is per day?
Per day. And you only have, that means you're recycling 200 times, probably. Now, this big snake-looking like thing is known as a nephron, those that haven't had lab yet. And this is the functional unit of your kidney. This is what makes urine, right? This little snake-looking like thing. It's got several different parts to it, right? This part up here, right, known as the glomerulus and the glomerular capsule, is the place where you do glomerular filtration. And we can color code it by the arrows. So green arrows is where you do glomerular filtration. If you notice, that's the only place you have it, because that's the only place you have a glomerulus. But now we have purple areas, right, and gold or yellow areas. The purple represent reabsorption, right? Now, here's what we need to stress, as I already did in the lab this evening. You guys had coffee and, let's say, soup before you came into lecture. It's in your stomach. You are going to absorb the nutrients in that food. So it goes from your intestines into the blood for the very first time, right? That is absorption. You are absorbing your nutrients. Now that blood that has your coffee and soup stuff in it, right, is going to come to my kidneys, because that's a arteriole. I'm going to filter the nutrients that were in my soup. They're going to go into my little snake-like structure called the proximal convoluted tubule, which we'll discuss in a minute. But I don't want soup in my urine. I don't want glucose in my urine. I want all the good things to go back into my blood. So it's the second time you're going to be, quote, absorbing it. So it's known as reabsorption. It was in your blood, but now it ended up in this fluid, and I want it out of that fluid back into my blood. That's why it's called reabsorption. And the fluid we are reabsorbing is called filtrate, because it is filtered fluid. There's lots of good things in that filtrate. You have 180 liters of that filtrate. I want to get most of it back. So anywhere we have a purple area, we are reabsorbing, purple arrows. Anywhere we have gold arrows, we are secreting. So this is how you want to think about reabsorption versus secretion. Reabsorption is going from the filtrate back into the blood. From the filtrate back into the blood. Secretion is what? Well, from the blood into the filtrate. That's what the picture shows me, right? From the blood into the filtrate. That probably means whatever is in that gold arrow was too big to fit through the filtration over here. But I still want to get rid of it, and we'll discuss that a bit tonight and on Wednesday. So the only place you can do filtration is glomerulus, but anywhere along the length of my tube here, apparently I can do various amounts of reabsorbing and secreting. All right, let's zoom in on that glomerulus where you do the filtration. And if you remember, I stressed the idea of the capillary bed, that if you can understand CHP and decomp and why we have filtration versus reabsorption, if you get that you would see it in the renal system and in the digestive system. Well, here it is in the renal system. It's the exact same idea. You have blood coming into the glomerulus. Well, it's at a pressure of 60 millimeters of mercury. Out of curiosity, does anybody remember the pressure on the arterial side of a capillary bed? 35 millimeters of mercury. This is a capillary bed that has an exceptionally high blood pressure. It needs that high blood pressure because we have 60 millimeters of blood pressure trying to push the plasma out through the glomerulus. But like in a capillary, there are colloids in the blood trying to keep the water in. But you also have fluid in the space acting as resistance, kind of like afterload in a sense. And that fluid is resistant. So as I'm trying to push out, this fluid is trying to push back in. And I've got two forces basically trying to keep the plasma in my blood. All of the solutes that are in the blood doing osmotic draw, trying to keep it in, and the literal pressure of the fluid outside trying to push itself back into the capillary. Well, what is 32 plus 18? 50, okay, that's good. Now, I've got 50 units of force trying to push into the capillary. I've got 60 trying to push out. Which one's greater?
60.
The pushing out. By how much is it greater?
10.
There's your 10. This is called the net filtration pressure. It is the amount of pressure literally responsible for your filtering. Net
Filtration. Filtration.
oh, filtration. There we go. All right. And what is the actual value of the net filtration pressure?
10.
All right, now what's responsible for that 10? The difference in the hydrostatic pressure, which is the pressure in the capillaries, working in opposition or against the two forces trying to keep the fluid in the capillary, which are the solutes and the literal pressure of the fluid outside, kind of acting like afterload. What if your blood pressure, the HP value, drops to 50? What is the value now of our net filtration pressure?
0.
And we call that renal failure. Net filtration pressure is only 10. And that's why I talk about how the kidneys are so important in kind of regulating blood volume, because blood volume relates to blood pressure. Through more of Wednesday's lecture, we're going to talk about how the kidneys are way more concerned about a drop in your blood pressure than they are an increase in your blood pressure. If that CHP number, right, goes from 60 to 59, that becomes 9. Your filtering process slows down. If that pressure becomes a 50, then these two cancel out. I've got 0. I've got no filtering at all. But what if that makes it up to 70? Then that doubles, right? I get more filtering. I can handle that. If that becomes 90, I can handle that. I can handle excess. I only have 10 units to screw around with. That's not much. And we're going to work really hard to keep that the same. Now, in terms of this filtering stuff, right? What we're looking at is this idea. So this is your capillary bed. This is a fenestrated capillary. This capillary here are these capillaries right in here. And that little arrow shows us the filtrate coming through. So here's the inside of the capillary, right? There's your red blood cells, your platelets, and large proteins. All of these act as a solute, which means that if you're too big to fit through the slits, you stay inside the blood. And whatever stays inside the blood, that's what's responsible for the osmotic pressure, that 32 number. And that's why you guys don't find blood in your urine, because the blood cell is much larger than the filtering slits. Well, when we look at this, let's go back to this for a second. We're going to do it in 2 places. So this is my filtering, right? That filtering is due to that number. There is an actual amount. We have a couple more numbers to memorize. So the green arrows are filtrate. We know you do 180 liters of that in a day. But most people don't talk about your daily filtrate production. They do a per minute number. And per minute, you guys do 125 milliliters per minute. And that is equal to what's called your, I better write it over here. So that 125 a minute, 125 milliliters per minute is also known as your glomerular filtration rate, otherwise known as GFR. Focus on the word rate. Whenever you see the word rate, that means something per minute of time, right? Heart rate, respiration rate, filtration rate. 125 is the magic number. Your kidneys are going to work really hard to keep this number. Don't let it get bigger and don't let it get smaller. So, this is going to be giving you a few numbers already. How many liters of blood come into the glomerulus? How many liters of filtrate per day?
180.
How many liters per minute? 125 milliliters per minute, right? Now, all of that has to be maintained. And all of that was due, right? This is because of that 10 net filtration units. This was due to the blood pressure in the glomerulus. Well, your kidneys have some automatic responses to changes in blood pressure. I'm trying to show them up here. So this is a diagram, because of PowerPoint, of my glomerulus. So this represents this idea right here, right? There's the afferent coming in, the efferent coming out. Notice how big the afferent is and how small the efferent is in relation to the afferent. So we come over here, same idea, right? Large afferent coming in, there's my glomerulus, and there's my efferent. We're going to be looking at how the afferent and efferent arterioles effect, in other words, result in GFR. So what is our normal GFR value? 125, right? That's what you're going to put in the first one. 125 mils a minute. That's normal. Now, if that's normal, what's going to happen to your GFR if I dilate? See how much bigger I made the afferent? But notice how the efferent was not changed? If I dilate the afferent, it becomes wider. And what am I trying to pound into you guys about structures and becoming larger in diameter? What happens to the resistance? It becomes less. And if there's less resistance, there's more flow. If you dilate the afferent, more blood can come into the glomerulus. What's that going to do to the pressure in the glomerulus? It's going to increase it, right? What does that do to GFR? It's going to increase it. If you're not sure why more blood means more pressure, think of it this way. This is an avenue with people coming into a building, and there's the exit. If you widen the entrance, more folks can come in, right? It gets more crowded in there. That means there's more people pressure. And more people pressure means a higher filtering process. Well, look what I did over here. I kept the afferent the same, but I increased the exit now. So it's easier for blood to leave. It's the same for it to come in. It's a normal coming in, but it's easier for it to leave. What do you think it's going to do to the pressure inside the glomerulus? It's going to drop it. And if you drop the pressure, what happens to GFR? It drops as well. So if you want to lower the GFR, all you have to do is dilate the efferent. If you want to raise GFR, then dilate just the afferent. Remember, these are arterioles. You can control the diameter of arterioles with vasoconstriction and vasodilation. Before we get to the next row, is everybody okay understanding why GFR went up and why GFR went down? Is there anybody like, I'm not quite sure? I'm going to assume the silence means that you get it. All right. What happens in this case then? How does that compare to the normal one? What did we do? We constrict the efferent. So what happens to your ability to leave the glomerulus? It's slower, right? That means what's going to do to the pressure inside? It's going to build up. What does that do to GFR? That increases GFR. So then you got two choices. You could dilate the afferent, or you could constrict the efferent. Both of those would raise the pressure in the glomerulus. Both of those would increase your glomerular filtration rate. Now what about this one? What did we do here? How does that compare to the normal one? Josie?
Dilated afferent, constricted efferent.
So we gave it a double whammy, right? We allowed more blood in, but we also made it harder for it to leave. What do you think that will do to the pressure in the glomerulus? It's going to jack it way up, right? Which means GFR goes way up. So if you think about it, if I can raise my GFR here in the very second diagram, you would probably do that if for some reason you had a drop in your GFR. And I want to bring it back to normal, right? So when we're raising GFR here, it's because it was lowered. When we're lowering GFR, that's because it got too high, and we want to bring it back down again. So if this middle one can really cause it to open up, what would this one do? So what do we do to the afferent? What do we do to the efferent? Okay. So now that's pretty equal the same, right? But it's going to be harder for blood to come in. The pressure would drop, right? And therefore, GFR would drop as well. Let's see here. Can you think of the only one we did not do? What combination is not up there?
Dilated afferent with a constricted afferent.
Who, what now?
Constricted afferent with a dilated efferent.
Constricted afferent with a dilated efferent. True. Okay, that's one. What's the other one? Double constricted. Who's double constricted? Yes, right. Constricted afferent and constricted efferent, right? Where you basically shut down the renal system, which we'll talk about if you ever have what's called hypovolemic shock. If somebody's bleeding out, the kidneys are going to say, well, what's my number one job? Maintain blood volume, right? I make urine from John's blood volume. If John's bleeding to death, we have an option. Continue to let his blood pressure drop and make urine, or stop making urine trying to save as much blood pressure as possible. This is why your kidneys shut down under severe blood loss. You don't want to be making urine, because every drop of urine comes from plasma. That means a drop in your blood pressure. That would be a severe, severe case. But you would actually have renal shutdown in trying to keep yourself from bleeding to death and losing lots of blood pressure. We're going to refer back to this lots of times. All right, so we're now going to walk through the various parts of your nephron. So you may want to kind of bounce back and forth for a minute between the structure of your nephron, right, and where we are in relation to the structure. There's where I do filtering, right? That's where I do all of this, right? My GFR. I'm getting 180 liters of fluid to come into this part here called the PCT. And the PCT, come here, stands for the proximal convoluted tubule. Proximal convoluted tubule. Convoluted means what? It means all twisted and warped. Proximal means close. So it's the close, warped, twisted tube. It's the closest to the glomerulus. Most commonly referred to as the PCT because who wants to write up proximal convoluted tubule every time? Well, what happens to the proximal convoluted tubule? The osmolarity of the fluid, of the filtrate, that just left the glomerulus is at 300 milliosmoles. That's the level of its concentration. That's the same as the blood, which kind of makes sense because it just came from the blood. So we're going to keep an eye on that number. Now that fluid just comes into the proximal convoluted tubule. I'm looking at 125 milliliters a minute of that, or 180 liters a day. Of that 180 liters a day, right, I'm going to reabsorb 60 to 70% of that volume right off the bat, put it right back into the bloodstream. And in that 60 to 70%, I'm going to be reabsorbing 99% of my organics and a lot of my solutes, such as sodium, potassium, and bicarbonates. Because I want them for normal neural function. Yeah, they got filtered because they were small enough to fit through the capillary bed. But I would rather keep them. So we're going to reabsorb them right off the bat. Now, the proximal convoluted tubule, its main job is reabsorption. That's its primary job. It does a lot of reabsorbing. It does a little bit of secretion. So it's sort of like reabsorbing is doing dishes, and secretion is like taking the duster and doing your ceiling fan and dusting the blinds and the bookshelf, which nobody wants to do. All right? This is a very small function of the proximal convoluted. This is the major job that it does. And if that filtrate is mainly plasma, and plasma is mainly water, of that 180 liters, you are reabsorbing 108 of that 180. That is an awful lot of reabsorption. So in that 108 is 99% of your organics and the majority of your ions. The interesting thing is when you do all this reabsorbing and all this water following, you're not going to change the osmolarity of the filtrate. It stays the same because we're absorbing both water and solutes. All we're doing is lowering the volume. We're not actually changing the overall concentration of it. We can see that by looking at this first. So there's my glomerulus, right? This is your proximal convoluted tubule. And how do we know it's the proximal convoluted tubule? Because it says so right there. These are simple cuboidal epithelial cells. And as I tease the first lab group with, you guys see those microvilli? Right? That's important to notice. Microvilli relate to surface area. And the more surface area, the more absorbing or reabsorbing, the more diffusing you can do. That's why we can do so much in the proximal. We have an awful lot of microvilli. We have a tremendous surface area inside the proximal convoluted tubule. So we can see these little dots being your solutes, right? Things I want to get back into what's called my peritubular capillaries. And these are the capillaries that are wrapping around the blue segment in the upper left-hand corner of our diagram. Because that's where we are in this image. We're in the proximal convoluted tubule. The capillaries are literally right next door to these cells. There is basically almost no space between them. So I can take the solutes that are in my filtrate, that 180 liters a day, I can get it from the filtrate into the blood by one of two possible routes. If I go between the two columnar cells, that's what's known as paracellular transport, right? Movement of substances between epithelial cells. Or I could go right across the membrane, known as transcellular transport. Movement of substances across the membrane. We're going to find lots of channels in the membrane. What you want to think about is a concept from 241 about the shape of a cell. So if this is the lumen, what term can I give to this side of this cell if that's the lumen? What side of the cell is this compared to this side?
Apical.
Apical, right? Remember, layers and cells all have apical and basal layers. Apical is the top, basal is the bottom, whether it's stratified or it's an actual cell itself. This is the apical layer, and this is the basal layer. That's going to be important. Apical layers have lots of transporters and lots of gates. We're going to be looking at them specifically in the upcoming slides. So I've got solutes that come into the filtrate that can either go back into the blood via a paracellular transport or through a transcellular transport. Transcellular require transporters in the apical membrane. Paracellulars are going between the cells. Do you guys remember something called intercellular junctions that keep cells anchored together? And we talked about one that's like sewing thread that really talks about the inability to let stuff pass between the cells. Remember we called that type of intercellular junction? They're really tight.
Tight junction.
We call them tight junctions. Well, here's the whole crap, you gotta be kidding me. There are tight junctions, and then there are loose tight junctions.
Well, of course they're close.
These are loose tight junctions.
Yeah.
Okay? I still gotta keep my cells anchored together, right? But I don't want to restrict the ability of stuff to pass in between them. So they're tight junctions, but they're just not tight ones, they're just loose ones. That's what's responsible for, right, paracellular transport. All right, so let's zoom in on that transcellular, not para, but the trans. Let's look at how that actually works, right? So you get your bearings for a moment. Over here in the far left is my nephron. The purple region is what this image is focusing on. Here's a cross section of that proximal convoluted tubule. Here's a bigger diagram of it. You can see the microvilli. That's the apical side of the cell. There's the filtrate fluid. There's my bless you proximal, or my peritubular capillaries. So this capillary here is that capillary up there. Let's focus on the very top here, where we have sodium coming in right through here. Those black lines, what do you think they are trying to represent? So let me ask you this. How can sodium normally cross the cell membrane? No, because it's a hydrophilic substance and cell membranes are mainly nonpolar. So how can you get facilitated diffusion of an ion across the cell membrane? What are your two possible transporters? Oh, and this is why John sent out that need to know 6-page document that I'm sure most of you still have yet to read.